I poured my heart, soul, and every penny into our dream home. Then, my husband and his family tried to steal it all, beginning with my name on the deed. The first thing I fell in love with wasn't my husband, Mark. It was the house. I know how that sounds, but it's the truth. It was a charming two-story with big windows that drank in the morning sun and a backyard that was just a patch of dirt and potential. I saw it all in my head. A sprawling garden with hydrangeas, a stone patio for summer evenings, a kitchen with a massive island where our future kids would do their homework. I poured every penny I had into that house. The down payment came from selling the sleek modern apartment I'd bought myself when I was 25. I'd loved that apartment, my little bachelorette fortress in the sky. But this house, this was a home. This was the foundation of the life Mark and I were supposed to build together. For 3 years, it was perfect. We painted walls, laid down new flooring with our own hands, and that patch of dirt in the back bloomed into the lush garden I'd dreamed of. Mark was wonderful, or so I thought. He was sweet, supportive, and seemed to love our quiet life as much as I did. The only crack in our perfect little world was his parents, Carol and David. They lived 3 states away, so their visits were rare, but each one felt like a small-scale invasion. Carol, my mother-in-law, had a way of complimenting things that felt like an insult. "Oh, this blue you chose for the living room is brave," she'd say, her lips pursed in a tight little smile. Mark always preferred more neutral tones. David, her husband, was her shadow, nodding along to whatever she said, a perpetually worried look on his face. They treated the house not as our home, but as Mark's achievement that I was simply a guest in. They'd walk through the rooms, Carol running a finger over a dusty shelf I'd missed, and say things like, "Our son has done so well for himself." I would just smile, bite my tongue, and remind myself they'd be gone in 48 hours. The trouble really started about a month ago. Mark's younger sister, Lena, was going through a messy divorce. It was sad, and I genuinely felt for her. She had to sell her house and was struggling to find a place to live. That's when my in-laws announced they were coming for an extended visit to provide support. I thought they meant emotional support for us as we helped Lena from afar. I was wrong. They arrived with 4 large suitcases. "Just the essentials," Carol announced, as if they were moving in, and in a way, they were. The first week was a nightmare of passive aggression. Carol rearranged my kitchen, claiming my system was inefficient. She'd help with the laundry and refold everything because I wasn't doing it to her standards. They started calling the guest room our room. Mark, bless his conflict-avoidant heart, just kept telling me to be patient. "They're just worried about Lena, honey," he'd say, kissing my forehead. "Let's just keep the peace." But the peace was entirely one-sided. It was my peace that was being sacrificed. I was starting to feel like a stranger in my own home. The breaking point came last night. I came downstairs to find Carol on the phone with a contractor, getting a quote to have the shower in the guest bathroom converted into a walk-in tub. "For when we get older," she explained breezily when she saw my face, not a hint of shame in her eyes. I pulled Mark into the garden, my sanctuary, and finally let him have it. I spoke in a harsh whisper, my voice shaking with rage. "This has to stop, Mark. They are planning to stay here permanently. They are changing my house without even asking me. You have to say something. You have to tell them to go home." He looked pained, wringing his hands. "They're just trying to help. Their hearts are in the right place. Their hearts are planning a renovation in my guest bathroom." I hissed. "This is my house, too. I paid for half of this house with my own money." He finally relented, promising he'd talk to them. This morning, I found all 3 of them sitting at my kitchen island, a place I had designed, looking at me with a strange mixture of pity and resolve. It felt like an ambush. Mark wouldn't meet my eyes. Carol was the one who spoke, her voice syrupy sweet. "Honey, we've had a long talk and we've come up with the perfect solution for everyone." I crossed my arms, my heart beginning to pound a nervous rhythm against my ribs. "A solution to what?" She smiled, a slow, predatory smile that didn't reach her eyes. She gestured around my beautiful kitchen, at the sun-drenched rooms, at the life I had built. "Well, this is our son's house now, and he needs his family. So, David and I have decided we'll move in to help him, and we figured out what to do for poor Lena, too. We'll give her your apartment." The words hung in the air of my sun-drenched kitchen, so absurd, so utterly insane, that for a full 10 seconds I couldn't even process them. Then a laugh escaped my lips. It wasn't a happy sound. It was sharp and brittle, bordering on hysterical. My apartment? I repeated, looking from Carol's smug face to David's nervous one, and finally to my husband, who was studying the grout between the floor tiles with intense concentration. You mean the apartment I sold 3 years ago? The money from which I used as the down payment for this house? You want to give Lena a ghost? Carol waved a dismissive hand, as if I were being difficult about a minor detail. Don't get caught up in semantics, dear. The point is, you had a place of your own. You're resourceful. Lena is in crisis. Lena's crisis doesn't mean you can just repossess my past and hand it out like a party favor. I snapped, my voice rising. I turned my full attention to Mark, my anchor, the man who was supposed to be my partner. Mark, are you going to say something here? Are you hearing this delusion? He finally looked up, his eyes pleading. Honey, they're just spitballing ideas. Let's not get upset. We need to find a way to help my sister. Help your sister? By making me homeless? The words came out in a strangled cry. I felt the floor drop out from under me. He wasn't defending me. He wasn't shutting them down. He was asking me to consider it, to keep the peace. Of course not, he said quickly, looking flustered. No one is making you homeless. Then what exactly are you proposing? I demanded. Where do I fit into this perfect solution where your parents move into my house and your sister gets a spectral apartment that doesn't exist? It was Carol who answered, her voice dripping with condescension. You're misunderstanding. This is a family home. It's too big for just you and Mark anyway. David and I can help with the upkeep. Be here for our son. It makes perfect sense. With us here, Mark won't be so lonely. Lonely? I practically shrieked the word. I live here. He's not lonely. Well, you work such long hours, she said, her eyes narrowing. A man needs his family around him. I felt like I was in a nightmare. They were talking about me as if I wasn't even in the room, a temporary inconvenience in the grand saga of their family. They weren't just overstepping boundaries. They were erasing me from my own life, painting me as a neglectful, career-obsessed wife who was failing their precious son. Enough, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. I walked over to the built-in desk in the corner of the kitchen, the one Mark and I had assembled together on a rainy Saturday. I yanked open the filing drawer. Let's talk about things that aren't semantics. Let's talk about legal documents. I pulled out the thick folder labeled house. This isn't just our son's house. This is our house, I said, my voice shaking with a fury I hadn't known I possessed. My name is on the deed. My money paid for the down payment. My salary pays for half of this mortgage every single month. You cannot just waltz in here and vote me out of my own home. I slammed the folder onto the granite island, the sound echoing in the silent kitchen. So you can take your perfect solution and, oh darling, Carol interrupted, her voice sickeningly calm. She exchanged a look with Mark, a look of shared secret knowledge that made a cold dread wash over me. Are you sure about that? Why don't you check again? My hands trembled as I fumbled with the clasp on the folder. I didn't understand. Of course I was sure. I signed the papers, I was there. I pulled out the stack of documents, my eyes scanning for the official deed. Maybe look at those refinancing papers Mark had you sign last month, David added softly, looking genuinely apologetic for the first time. The ones to lower the interest rate. My blood ran cold. The refinancing. It had been a whirlwind. Mark had handled it all, saying it would save us a few $100s a month. He'd just put a stack of papers in front of me late one night, pointing to where I needed to sign. It's all standard stuff, he'd said, kissing my temple. Just trust me. And I had. I had trusted him completely. With trembling fingers, I found the new paperwork. I scanned the lines, the legal jargon swimming before my eyes, until I found the section titled Title Holders. And there, in stark black and white, was only one name. Mark's. He had refinanced the house solely in his name, taking mine off the deed, the world tilted on its axis. The paper in my hands felt both flimsy and impossibly heavy, a death sentence for the life I thought I had. I read the line again and again. Title holders, Mark Sterling, singular, one name, not mine. The air was sucked out of my lungs, replaced by a roaring in my ears. I looked up from the document, my gaze locking onto my husband. He was no longer the man I loved, the man I'd built a home with. He was a stranger, a con artist who had smiled and kissed me while methodically dismantling my life. You, I whispered, the sound barely audible. I cleared my throat and tried again, my voice a raw, ragged thing. You did this. Honey, let me explain, he started, taking a step toward me, his hands outstretched as if to calm a spooked animal. It wasn't like that. The bank advisor said it would be simpler. Simpler? I laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that clawed its way out of my throat. Simpler to steal my half of the house? Simpler to erase me? Was it simpler when you lied to my face about it? I was going to tell you, he insisted, his voice cracking. The timing was never right. With Lena's situation and my parents. Oh, the timing wasn't right? I threw the papers onto the island, scattering them across the granite. But the timing was perfect for your mother to announce she's moving in and giving away my non-existent apartment? What a coincidence. Carol stepped forward, placing a proprietary hand on Mark's arm. Now, there's no need for hysterics. Mark did what was necessary to protect his asset, a family asset. We all agreed it was for the best. We all agreed? I stared at her, then at the weak-willed man she called a son. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't a recent development. This was a plan, a long, carefully orchestrated coup. The extended visit, the constant undermining, the refinancing, it was all part of it. They had been waiting for the ink to dry before making their move. You put them up to this, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. The fury was still there, a white-hot inferno in my chest, but it was being overlaid with an icy layer of resolve. This was your idea. Carol smiled her tight, triumphant little smile. A mother knows what's best for her son. A house this valuable needs to be kept in the family. We couldn't risk complications. Complications. That's what I was. A complication to be managed, manipulated, and ultimately removed. I looked at Mark, searching for any flicker of the man I married. I found nothing but a puppet, his strings held firmly in his mother's grasp. He couldn't even meet my eyes. I see, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I was done screaming. I was done being hysterical. They wanted a complication. They were about to get one. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the kitchen. I could hear Mark calling after me. Honey, where are you going? We can talk about this. Don't be like this. I ignored him. I walked up the stairs we had sanded and stained together, my hand gliding over the banister I had chosen. I went into our bedroom, his bedroom now, I supposed, and walked straight to my closet. I didn't pack clothes. I pulled out the small fireproof safe I kept hidden in the back. I spun the combination, my fingers steady, and opened it. Inside were my passport, my birth certificate, and all the financial documents from before my marriage. Bank statements showing the sale of my apartment, records of the wire transfer for the down payment, every single receipt for the major renovations I had paid for out of my own savings account. I had kept everything. My father, a meticulous accountant, had always told me, keep a paper trail for your life. You never know when you'll need to prove who you are and what you've built. I stuffed the documents into my large work tote. I added my laptop, its charger, and the external hard drive where I backed up everything. Then I went into the master bathroom and swept my toiletries into a small bag. As I walked back through the bedroom, my eyes landed on the framed photo on the nightstand. It was from our wedding day. We looked so happy, so full of hope. Mark was beaming, his eyes crinkling at the corners. My Mark, the man who didn't exist anymore. With a sudden, sharp movement, I picked up the frame, opened the back, and slid the photo out. I left the empty silver frame sitting on the nightstand. I pocketed the picture and walked back downstairs. They were all standing in the entryway, waiting for me, blocking the door. Mark looked panicked, Carol looked annoyed, and David just looked miserable. What are you doing? Mark asked, his voice pleading. You can't just leave. Can't I? I said, raising an eyebrow. According to you and your legal documents, I'm just a guest here, and I've decided my stay is over. I walked toward the door. Mark moved to block me. Please, just listen. We can figure this out. Don't go. I stopped a foot in front of him and looked directly into his eyes. You have 30 seconds to move out of my way before I call the police and tell them your mother and father are trespassing and that you are holding me here against my will. And believe me, I will enjoy making that scene. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. Carol gasped in outrage, but David put a restraining hand on her arm. Slowly, shamefaced, Mark stepped aside. I opened the front door, the cool evening air a welcome shock to my system. I stepped onto the porch, onto the slate tiles I had picked out, and turned back to face them one last time. They stood clustered together in the warm light of the home I had built, a perfect little family unit. You wanted this house all to yourself, Mark, I said, my voice as cold and hard as the stone beneath my feet. Congratulations, you got it. I paused, letting the words sink in before delivering the final blow. I hope it was worth it. My lawyer will be in touch. I didn't go to a hotel. I didn't call my friends and break down in a torrent of tears. I drove straight to my office. I'm an architect, and the firm I work for has a small, unused apartment on the top floor for visiting executives. I called my boss, a tough-as-nails woman in her 60s named Eleanor, and told her a heavily redacted version of the truth. My husband and I have separated. I need a place to stay for a bit. She didn't ask questions. She just gave me the code to the door and told me to take as much time as I needed. That night, surrounded by blueprints and the quiet hum of the city, I didn't sleep. I spread my documents across a massive drafting table and built my case. I had the wire transfer confirmation for the down payment, clearly showing the funds moving from my account, the account that had received the proceeds from my apartment sale, to the escrow company. I had bank statements showing my half of the mortgage payments being automatically transferred to our joint account for 3 years straight. I had receipts with my name and my credit card number for the new hardwood floors, the kitchen appliances, the custom-built shelving in the living room, even the damn hydrangeas in the garden. I had emails between me and the contractor discussing renovation plans. Mark might have taken my name off the deed, but I had a mountain of evidence proving my financial and personal investment in that house. I had built it, literally and figuratively. He had just lived in it. The next morning I called a lawyer Eleanor had recommended. He was a shark named Arthur Vance, and when I laid out my paper trail, his eyes lit up. This is a classic case of fraudulent conveyance and unjust enrichment, he said, practically purring. Your husband thinks he's clever. We're going to show him what clever really looks like. Arthur filed an emergency motion to place a lias pendens on the property, which is a legal notice that essentially freezes the asset. It meant Mark couldn't sell it, transfer it, or take out another loan against it until our dispute was settled. Arthur said it was like putting the house in a legal straitjacket. The petition we filed was a work of art. It detailed every dollar I'd spent, every design decision I had made, and laid out the clear, premeditated conspiracy to defraud me of my property. We weren't just asking for my half of the equity. We were suing for damages, legal fees, and reimbursement for the money from my apartment, which Arthur argued was a non-marital asset I had invested with the clear expectation of co-ownership. The reaction was immediate. Mark started calling, texting, leaving tearful voicemails. They were pathetic. How could you do this to me? To my family? You're tearing everything apart. He'd whine. It was astonishing. In his mind, I was the villain for refusing to be thrown out onto the street. I never answered. I let Arthur handle everything. Carol called me once from a blocked number. You are a selfish, ungrateful girl. She spat into the phone. You're trying to take our son's home away from him. Actually, Carol, I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. I'm just taking back what's mine. You wanted the house to stay in the family. I guess you just weren't specific about which family. I hung up before she could respond. The case never made it to court. Faced with my mountain of evidence, Mark's lawyer told him he didn't have a prayer. His only move was to settle. The negotiation was brutal. Arthur was relentless. Mark wanted to sell the house and split the proceeds. I refused. That house was my dream, my creation. I wasn't letting them force me out of it. The final settlement was this. Mark had to buy me out of my half of the current market value of the house, which had appreciated significantly. In order to get the loan for that amount, He had to use the house itself as collateral. He also had to legally reimburse me for the full down payment I had made from the sale of my apartment, plus interest. And finally, he was responsible for all legal fees, mine and his. It was a devastating financial blow. There was no way he could afford the mortgage on his own, let alone the massive new loan he needed to pay me out. He was forced to sell. But because of the current market and the high interest rates, it took 4 agonizing months. During that time, Carol and David had to live in a half-empty house full of boxes, their grand retirement plan crumbling around them. Lena, as far as I know, never got an apartment. She had to move back in with some friends. The day the sale finally closed, Arthur called me. "The money's been wired to your account," he said. "Congratulations, you're free." I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt quiet. I had lost a husband and a home, but I had found my backbone. The money that landed in my account was more than enough to start over. For a few weeks, I considered buying another house, starting another garden, but the idea felt tainted. Instead, I found a beautiful, spacious loft apartment for rent in a renovated old warehouse downtown. It had soaring ceilings, huge windows that overlooked the city skyline, and a massive open-concept kitchen. It was sleek, modern, and unapologetically mine. It was a fortress, just like my first apartment, but bigger, stronger. The day I moved in, I sat on the polished concrete floor, surrounded by boxes, and pulled out the photo from our wedding. I looked at the smiling man, the stranger in the picture, and I finally understood. I hadn't fallen in love with the house first. I had fallen in love with a dream of a life, and I had mistakenly cast him as the co-star. The house was just the stage. Now the stage was gone, the actor was fired, and I was the only one left. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I was more than enough to write the rest of the show myself.